My name is John Leider. I am the author of Vuetify. I started working on it in June of 2016, and as of October of 2017, I've been working on this full-time. So as I said before, I want to talk first about the growth of Vuetify, how we have expanded things like our community, the support options that are available to businesses, and some of the tooling options that help developers accomplish more with Vuetify in a short amount of time. So since our release, we have averaged 10% growth month on month, every single month since 2016, and this isn't showing any signs of slowing down, especially with the increased adoption rate of Vue. We are now the #1 downloaded component framework in the ecosystem, hoping to get close to 1 million before the end of the year so we can maybe have like a celebration or giveaway or something, but it was a very big achievement for the team and we're very excited about that. We have a very large contributor base. So we have, and I'll talk about this later, we have a organizational structure that helps us be very organized and very assertive in our approach for working with the framework. So we work with a lot of developers, we work with a lot of businesses to make sure that our product is meeting their needs. And if you're on Discord, if you haven't heard of it, it's kind of like Slack. The VueLand is on Discord. We also have a community on Discord that I really try to encourage people to get into because we have a very large user base, a very responsive moderation staff, which we actually have a couple of those members here today. And overall, it just provides, I think, a really good experience for developers that are trying to get help, but don't want to be stuck in a black box trying to go through GitHub replies or something like that. So I want to talk a little bit about the organization structure. We've been kind of refining this over the years, and the concept is that with open source, motivation to work on it for developers will wax and wane over time. So my job is trying to make sure that we have adequate support from core team to contributors to volunteers over the course of the year because some people have to go and come back, et cetera, and so forth. So our core development team, we have, I believe it's 6 or 7 members now, which we have 2 of them here, including myself, is composed of a very small group of individuals that are primarily responsible for guiding the direction of the framework. Most of the core team is going to have kind of a specialized thing that they take over. For example, Andrew is the documentation. Albert does data tables, stuff like that. But they also provide general, working on the framework and updates. Then we have core contributors. These are people that are obviously adding to the framework over time, but don't really have kind of a specific job. They're mostly it's people that are at larger businesses that are using Vuetify, people that are using accessibility, and we kind of want to pull them in to get their opinions to see how we can improve supporting their business structures with Vuetify. And so we have a very large amount of core contributors that come in and work on either specific components or work with us to provide feedback to make sure that we're handling the structure as good as possible. We also have a community moderation team. So as I talked about before, we have the 2nd largest community on Discord. And so with that, we get lots of questions, we get lots of people coming through, and in order to accommodate that, we have to have a very large moderation team. So these are individuals that kind of take care of making sure people are in the correct channels, because that's one of the biggest difficulties in a community is getting people to the right place so they can get the help that they need. But they do an excellent job, and it kind of gives us this environment where developers, like I said before, never feel alone. They can talk with other people that are working with Vuetify and get help, and you actually get to talk directly with us, the developers. We're always on Discord, everyone is very active, and it's really great to be able to actually coordinate with the community some of the issues that they're having, and it allows us to identify issues very fast and allows us to move fast to fix them. And then we have regular volunteers, and these are kind of, so for example, for 2.2, when we go to release, we'll pull in a bunch of volunteers to help do some massive testing before we get it out. And this kind of just helps ensure that we have as solid of a product as possible once we get into the user's hands. So I want to talk to you a little bit about our release cadence. So this is something that I think sets us apart from other UI frameworks. So we have a consistent weekly release cadence. So every Tuesday, you're going to get patches. And for previous versions, which I'll talk about long-term support, for security vulnerabilities and backported fixes, we still release versions, still release updates on them for 12 to 18 months. We have quarterly minor releases, which we have one coming up at the end of the year. It's going to be version 2.2, should be arriving towards the end of December after all the holidays, and we continue to do that, so on and so forth. We have an expansive roadmap where I've detailed it out till about Q3 of next year, and we're going to emphasize some more on the details of what comes in it, but what we're really trying to do is show people that we have a path forward for not only new features and functionality, upgrading existing components that maybe aren't up to quality with some of their other parts, and just always trying to iterate on the framework to provide the best possible product for users. We also have annual major releases. So this means that every single year, if we need to, we generally don't have very many breaking changes. We have a couple things that we want to introduce, but mostly it's pretty painless, what we expect to move up. And with the next version of Vue 3, we're going to try to launch Vuetify 3 at the exact same time. So hopefully that can correspond very nicely. And again, like I talked about, the expansive roadmap, we kind of detail some of the new features and functionality that we're going to be adding. Sometimes they kind of have a theme for it, and I'll talk about version 2.2 in regards to like how we define like a release kind of has like an idea behind it, like it's trying to fix forms or it's trying to assert some other type of functionality to kind of tackle areas for developers that help them create better applications. All right, so that's a little bit about the growth of Vuetify. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of our version 2 updates. Now version 2 launched July of this year. I talked about it last year. There's a video, I believe, on Vue Mastery when I kind of brought up about some of the things that we were looking at moving into version 2, more composition of components, providing more baseline functionality. So if you don't like our component, you can build your own. For example, a carousel. Maybe you don't like the way our carousel works. Well, we provide all the components we use to build it, and you can make your own. And that was a really big change for us to version 2 because it allowed us to provide better testing coverage. Everything was scoped and composed all the way up to create these very large components. But then we also provided these baseline functionalities so people can come in there and create their own implementations. So as I said before, July 2019 is when it was released. One of the big focuses of 2.0 was accessibility, WCAG, and Section 508 support, which is very important for government agencies or any enterprise-level companies that you will get sued if you don't have accessibility, and I also encourage everyone to do it anyways. As a disabled veteran, I can say that it is very important to be able to accommodate all people to access the web. So I think that this is something that really sets us apart from frameworks that implement non-standard HTML, which obviously comes standard, selects, work with accessibility off the gate. So something that really, I think, helps set us apart. We have complete RTL support for Arabic languages and bidirectionality, completely out of the box. We are always making improvements towards it. There's always room for improvement, but we do have some dedicated people that have been working on it, and we have had a really, really good response. We completely converted the framework to TypeScript, which for us was kind of an intermediate leading up to the TypeScript improvements that are coming in version 3 that Evan talked about, which are going to be vastly superior in our situation. But we wanted to get the entire framework to TypeScript, mainly because people wanted support for TypeScript. But with so many people working in the application, it became very difficult with things being passed and not being type checked. So it was very difficult, and we felt that it was a good upgrade to make. Same thing with Sass. So we used Stylus before. It was one of the first frameworks that, CSS frameworks that I was using when I first started developing. But we wanted to move to Sass because it had more performance improvements and it had a larger community behind it. And we were able, our goal is we want to try to get as many people to contribute to the project as possible because a varying degree of that helps us become a better framework. And we added multiple new components, like we have a fully fleshed out calendar component. We have some amazing implementations like a color picker, chips. We have a couple examples right here. Scrolling techniques for toolbars. A lot of the things that you see in Google that is defined in their specification, we're going to put it in there, and we have it. And I believe we're about 90% for Material Design 2 specification, and we're going to try to round that out before version 2.3. Moving on to version 2.1, now this was a really fun patch for me because I really wanted to focus on usability for people performance-wise and making it, trying to not have too many things going on at once. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So we released September 2019, version 2.1. We had substantial accessibility improvements. We actually have a developer on the team. His job has a team of disability testers, and they actually work with us to help make sure that we are working properly with all the various popular screen readers. And so that's something that we're always going to be improving upon, but right now I feel like it's in a really good position, and I believe we offer really good functionality for supporting people, all people to use the web. We had some really massive performance updates. So if you have used Vuetify before, you may have run into a situation if you have lots and lots of forms and you're binding things with vModel and the updates maybe feel kind of sluggish. You can tell there's some millisecond update time. So luckily, if anyone's been in the community and you've met Kale, he has been able to create a workaround for us in version 2.1 that massively improves the performance, which has been really good for the framework. That was kind of one of the sore spots. And then we added some really cool new components and directives. So if anyone's worked, has anyone here heard of the Observer, Intersection Observer API or the Mutation Observer API? All right, so if you haven't, it is a very, very powerful resource, and they are polyfillable back to IE11, which is what we support. And one of those, so we've taken, for example, the Intersection Observer API, and we've put it behind a directive so that you can utilize it for determining if things are on screen to perform specific actions. And then we kind of bundled that up with some additional components. So we have a vLazy component. So say you have an application where you want everything to lazy load, you can create a lazy component, and everything within it will only dynamically load once it's close to the user screen or on the user screen, depending upon whatever you set up for the threshold. And then that allows us to move to other things, like, for example, our image component. Automatic, out-of-the-box, lazy loading. And if, for whatever reason, the browser doesn't support it or it fails, it gracefully falls back. So this allows us to bring some really unique features that just work right out of the box. And as a developer, you really don't have to think about it. You just say, hey, I put this here, and I know that it's going to give me the result that I'm looking for. And then again, with 2.1, we really try not to have a lot of upgrade steps. We really want the process to be as smooth as possible. I feel like large upgrade processes and mishandling of upgrade steps are really something that have plagued software OSS in general. So we really just try to make sure that we're being cognizant of the changes that we're making and doing it in a good fashion. So again, some of the highlights for 2.1, skeleton loaders, which has been one of my favorite components to build. You've probably seen them on applications like Fandango or whatever else where it kind of shows a preview of what's going to load. Lazy loaded images talk about, so by default, lazy loaded images, and then the new directives, again, making a really powerful, or giving you more tools at your disposal to really implement some amazing custom UI interfaces. And now 2.2. So like I said before, it's going to be coming out at the end of December, and we've got some really awesome features coming. So one of the big concerns with material design is that a lot of designers just hate it. They don't feel like they can actually customize on it, and really most people associate material design with admin dashboards or back-end type applications. So we recognize this as a problem, and even though it is possible to really edit this right now, we've kind of abstained from creating a lot of documentation on it because we were never really happy with the process. And now we are. So in Material Design 2, Google introduced a concept of material studies. And what this was to do is to show people how you can make modifications to the design specification to have a unique display while also using and utilizing material design. So what we decided to do was we're going to take those presets as an example and show you how to build them, and we're going to bundle them in. But you're also going to be able to make your own. We're adding hundreds and thousands, like lots and lots of SAS variables. They're going everywhere. And we're going to be updating the documentation to make it easier to access this. We will eventually be adding a generator where you can go in there and select everything you want and get an output for a preset. But essentially, in a nutshell, You import a preset, you pass it to the Vuetify object, and boom. You've got an entirely customized application ready to go. You can edit Sass variables, you can change global framework processes, and it's going to be the introduction to allowing users to fine-tune more of their application on kind of a global level instead of maybe having to do it at the component or directive. So Sass, if you've ever worked with Sass and Vuetify before, it was kind of an arduous process where you had to go through and create a file and update some information in your Vue CLI config, or if you're using Webpack, different bootstrap methods. But we've recently updated our CLI plugin where now this is done automatically. So you basically just create a file in one of a couple different types of folders, whatever you want, and then it just works. It just bootstraps up, and then you are good to go. So this was a new feature that we recently introduced with Vue CLI 3, with our updated CLI plugin, and it's been absolutely amazing. If you haven't been to our docs, you can check it out now, Vuetify.js.com. We've recently made a very substantial update to the visual design and how we give information to users. And we obviously are still working and always wanting to improve, but it was a massive update in being able to provide more information for users in a better way, and we've had a very positive response. So if you had worked with the docs before, you've probably seen the update in the past couple weeks, but if you haven't, please take a look at them. We've got some really interesting information on there. And again, like I said, we're going to release end of December 2019, and yeah, I'm really excited to get that out there. So one of the last things I want to kind of talk about here is the developer experience and support. So this is something that is very tricky in open source, and as a UI framework, I've decided to kind of go the path of making sure that there are methods for users of all avenues, from single developer to enterprise, that they have support networks, and that they also have tools to make the development experience much better. So here's a list of some of our ecosystem plugins that we have, and I'll just kind of run through them real quick. So one of the great things that Vuetify has out of the box is automatic tree shaking. So what you use is what you get. Automatic bundle sizes reduced. We found that most of our users were about 25 to 35% of the framework. And as a UI library, no matter how efficient you are, you're going to grow horizontally. There's nothing you can do. So we had to come up with a way to allow people to access this without having this massive library and massive bundle. So the loader was a really big advocate for that. And then one of the things that was also with the loader is if you've ever been to a site like Medium where you come and then the image is blurry and then it fades in once it loads. So that's actually built in. We have documentation on how to add it, but I believe next week we're releasing an update where it'll just work automatically if you want it to. So again, one of those things where it's like, I have this image component, I put it in, I can modify things like aspect ratio, and it lazy loads, and then it has progressive loaders on top of that. So you just have this really good user experience right out of the box where you really don't have to do much. So we have our CLI plugin, which I talked about very briefly, and essentially this is kind of our entrance to bootstrapping a default Vue CLI installation and being able to provide you with some basic boilerplate for your project, while also bootstrapping some functionality behind the scenes, some of the things that we're taking away for users having to modify, but you still can. The CLI, now I talked about this briefly last year, and we're going to see it today, but one of the things that I've been really focusing on this year is tooling. And if anyone here has ever used Laravel or Django or anything like that, where they kind of have these CLIs where you can scaffold boilerplate, I really liked that as a new developer because it gave me confidence knowing like, hey, the author put this structure together, he believes this is a good way to go, I feel this is a good spot for me to start. Because I know that's often a difficult thing when coming into new areas. You're like, what is the best way to do this? I don't really understand. So the CLI, and we're going to show it later, is going to be the endpoint for that, creating boilerplate for your components, views, and different things like that. Storybook, we have a new Storybook component that's in development right now. And essentially, one of the things that when I work with companies that I see, so we try to set up wrapping components around Vuetify, because most companies have an own design specification, so they want to take the components and they want to wrap them and do something else. Well, one of the things that a lot of people miss out on, especially for stakeholders and designers, is being able to have kind of this visual interface of all of your components. And Storybook does exist, and you can hook it up now. But I really wanted to automate the process. So for example, if you're using CLI and Storybook together, when you create a new component, you automatically get a story, it automatically bootstraps a Storybook component. And it also bootstraps unit tests and various other things that just make it easy to where you don't have to think, give me a component and start working. Now, we also have an ESLint plugin. The primary focus for this is if you were on version 1.5, we recently updated our grid system to be more in line with what Bootstrap has. We felt it was a very obviously well-developed piece of open source, and we thought it might be an easier transition for people to utilize. We still supported our old grid system, and even in the future, we're going to create a legacy package for it. But for users that wanted to upgrade, generally the grid is a lot of components. So we have an ESLint plugin that automatically does it for you. About 95%, unless you have some interesting implementations, is going to be automatically updated for you. So again, this goes back into the theme of making it easier for developers to upgrade and move on to the new versions of the software. We have an ESLint config, which sits on top of the Vue config for styling inside of your application. And this is really, this is an opinionated config. We personally use it on the team. And it's just one more way of kind of saying, hey, this is how we like to do things. If you want it, here's available. You can also see how we did it if you want to make your own. And then the last thing, and this is what we're going to see today, is the Vue CLI preset. Now, one of the features that is not very well known or very well utilized, I think, in the Vue CLI is their preset option. So if you've ever been installing a Vue app and you go through the prompts at the end, it's going to ask you, do you want to save a preset, right? That's kind of the borderline or baseline of what that is. As a developer, we can create what's called a remote preset. And what that allows us to do, if you've ever worked in Vue 2 with its CLI, whenever we had the monolithic kind of repositories where you would download the whole repository, and then if there was an update, it was a nightmare. Well, this is kind of harkened to that in that everything is already selected, everything is already pre-configured. You write one line, you've got an application in less than 5 minutes ready to start coding. Now, before we get into that demo a little bit later, I want to talk a little bit about another thing that I think sets us apart is we provide long-term support. Now, with version 1.5, we started out with 12 months because we wanted to make sure we had a good grasp of what it was going to take in order to support that. And now that we have obviously done this for a couple months, we feel very confident, and going with when we release version 3, version 2 will actually extend to 18 months, and every major after that will be the same. And what long-term support entails is any critical bugs and security vulnerabilities automatically sent back, and any backported fixes that we can move from version 2 to 1.5, we try to do. And then, obviously, we can't fix everything, so we have lots and lots of passionate developers in the community that we work with that say, hey, this is a bug that's at 1.5, I'd like to fix it. Absolutely, we'll get the PR in, we'll get a release out. You know, we want to make sure that developers have the best piece of software they possibly can. And we just have a really active project. We have so many developers that are contributing to making it a great product. And it's just, if you take a look at our insights on GitHub, it's just amazing the amount of support we have with people contributing. And I think that really helps us be able to advance the framework as fast as we have. So I'm getting close on time, but I'm going to quickly touch on business support structures. And what this is, when you come into the community or when you start working with Vuetify, you may have different needs to help you with your project. So we have the free community support where you can go in and talk to the developers, our moderation team, and talk with core members. And everybody has access to that. It's there all the time. And then we have these other tiers. So maybe you have a small, a large, or enterprise business, and there's maybe different things that you need. Maybe you'd like to have some consulting time to talk with me. Maybe you'd like to have some of your GitHub issues prioritized. Things like that, to be able to give businesses a sense of, if we have an issue, we can get support. And we've also partnered with Tidelift, which helps us on our enterprise end for dealing with large-scale clients, maybe government contracts, because most of the time they don't want to create a single account to sponsor just one guy. And here we are to the live demo. So you can follow along if you want. If you type this into your laptop in your CLI and go into install it, it will completely scaffold the application. Now keep in mind, if you're on a laptop, it will take a few minutes, so I've actually already have this set up and ready to go. And this is still an alpha, but I wanted to really show everyone some of the cool things that are going to be coming soon. So when you first install this right off the bat, you're going to have kind of a pre-set-up structure. And this, essentially, if you've worked with any Vue application, is kind of the same thing. You have views, you have a store, you have a router, etc. And we add a couple things like layouts. If you've ever worked with Nux, they've got a really amazing system where you can hook in layouts to your views. And I wanted to be able to offer something like that. So now it's possible with this preset. It's just you can create however many layouts you want and assign them to components, or views, and it'll just work. We have lots of component structure. So one of the things that I really have been focusing on is unit testing for a couple reasons. Number one, everyone should unit test. And you should convince your job to do so. It saves so much time, and it's amazing. But one of the problems is that even though it's easier to get into unit testing with Vuetify now, we wanted to just, and this is coming from the CLI, I wanted it to be automatic. I wanted it to be ready. So, and you will be able to disable this in the future if for whatever reason you just hate unit tests. But the idea, again, with the unit tests and the storybook is I type one command and everything's ready to go. And then whenever you run the application, you're going to see, very basic, I portray how to do a layout for a front end and a layout of back end. A common thing that I do when I'm working with clients is you have a front end for your SaaS application, and then you've got a back end for that. So I kind of have that set up with components and show people how I do it and how you can do it. And this is... I want to release this before version 3, but I will say right now probably version 3 for Vue, whenever that launches, is when we'll get this out. But the idea is that users can type one line and start working, start prototyping, start showing people, and start working on ideas. And I'm really excited for some additional things that we're going to be bringing in the future. And yeah, I think that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening. Let me put up the final bit here. So obviously, Vuetify has project sponsors. They are what make this this whole thing possible. And okay, I have no idea what's... Okay, cool. So they're the ones that make this possible. I'm really appreciative of it. And these are businesses that are using Vuetify, or, for example, like Vue Mastery, if you're looking at our front page. Ben Hong has recently released a new video, or video series. It's like a Vuetify with Vuetify. And so we're always trying to make sure that we're having a lot of resources available for users to digest how to work in the framework kind of however they want to. And this is why we're going to be bringing additional guides, more information in the documentation, and really just trying to enrich the ecosystem in which you're in. And this is what I really honestly believe sets us apart from anybody else, and I really encourage everyone to please at least give Vuetify a try. I would love to hear your feedback. You're going to have to pass my booth to get to the food. Get some food, get your full bellies. I will be here all day today, all day tomorrow. We've got our community manager, Brandon Dio, here. We have our documentation wizard, Andrew, and we have 2 of our moderation members here, and we would love to talk to you and hear about your questions. We are always wanting to improve the product, and we want to make sure that it's accommodating every possible use case that we can handle. Social media information, you can follow me at Twitter at 0skills. We have at Vuetify.js as well if you want to follow the framework. And then obviously the main documentation page, Vuetify.js.com. So again, my name is John Leider. Thank you very much.